So I'm pretty sure many of you have already seen the Godzilla vs Hulk death battle that dropped over the summer. However, there has been a lot of dishonest composite scaling throughout the years that has tried to convince people that Godzilla really has a chance in this debate, most particularly when discussing IDW's Godzilla and Hell and others outside of the Marvel and DC versions. Death Battle also had their own problems too, especially when it came to Marvel Godzilla not being recognized as being canon, even though Marvel re-released the issues that he was in originally, which is very impactful considering Marvel's iteration makes the fight against Hulk very competitive. And you'll also see how troubling it becomes for Godzilla when you actually stack in the composite attributes to Hulk, right? But that would only be fair if Godzilla's allowed to be composited in the first place, right? Now, in this video, I will deeply and extensively cover base and composite Earth 616 Hulk alongside the higher aspects of Godzilla. But I also want to tackle the arguments people try to use for composite Godzilla and why some of its scaling is outright disingenuous. Along the way, I'll also cover other Marvel characters that help scale Hulk and Godzilla due to direct confrontations rather than just simply chain scaling. As you'll see in a lot of these Marvel and DC videos that I have coming up, a lot of these god tier characters will frequently battle each other or other large threats, so it is all one big web of consistency. For starters, I want to make it clear that the main reason Godzilla can even compete is through Godzilla Ultima, Marvel Godzilla, and DC Godzilla if you do think the heroes he was fighting were truly comparable to the Prime Earth versions. But first we'll be focusing on Godzilla Ultima and Godzilla in Hell, which, although it is an amazing concept with groundbreaking art that is interwoven into the philosophical aspects of what constitutes a being in itself, and how the largest victory in life isn't just to conquer your enemies and fears like Godzilla did whilst battling throughout all these layers of hell, but to truly win, you have to basically conquer yourself, most importantly. Aside from that strong iconography and narrative, within the power scaling sphere, on the other hand, this Godzilla has devolved into some horrible SCP, mega conceptual headcanon creature due to like 99% of its quote-unquote evidence being largely unofficial and full of components that are not backed up by the source material, or other primary elements which, you know, actual competent scalers will use over third-party author statements that don't have any concrete foundation to begin with.
I know math is hard, but like if you're a broke boy, just say so.
Godzilla in Hell does have pretty dope feats even when you're just looking at it from the surface or narrative point of view and the inspiration behind them. No, there isn't any God Mountain wank scaling here, but there is a pretty good case to be made for Godzilla in Hell to being at least a higher dimensional conceptual entity that could not only counter his eternal nemesis, but also go beyond the dualities of life and death by eating the angels and their power, and he could also assimilate the power of entities that were meant to consume him to the point he was actually able to just straight up one-tap the tentacle monster at the top of the implied last layer of hell, which is one of several infinite or quote-unquote eternal realms that Godzilla went through, with even these earlier layers representing the conceptual evil and misfortunes throughout existence. And Godzilla was even able to destroy one of these hellish planes in his battle with Space Godzilla. And yeah, it might look like they were fighting on the normal universe, and that is, you know, that issue is showing how Godzilla got there in the first place, but it is actually revealed by the writers that Godzilla can't die in these crossovers, so that destruction, that's actually like a whole universe, basically. This transcendence is further explored by each realm being stated to be even darker than the last, so if you want to say that Godzilla in Hell is on some multiversal scale of power through what is showcased and stated within the comic itself, this is very fair, I would say, and is much stronger than when I had primarily read it several years ago. But I still hold to my assertion from back then that the headcanon metas surrounding Godzilla that scale into the hyperversal to high outerversal ranges is very tricky and not really concrete to practically use. Especially because when you're scaling to abstract concepts or the purest, highest forms of emotion in existence, it is all relatively limited by what the constraints of the cosmology actually are. So even if we did say that Godzilla scales to the, god tiers of that verse and is a conceptual entity, it is baseline far less impressive than the stuff that we see being stated for, even like the substrate for the cosmic entities in Marvel, or like, the bare minimum of that tier, say like the in-betweener, who can peer into all concepts and dualities at least to a very high extent within most of reality. Yet even a character that strong is still fodder to the cosmic entities higher on the pedestal, which, as you'll see later into the video, can help dictate Banner's strength because he actually scales to and far above most of them, whether you're talking about their avatars or even their true forms. In whichever case, even this multiversal or even complex multiversal scaling for Godzilla and Hell is generous and still fodder to Hulk by several infinite gaps, even pre-Immortal Hulk, way before, he was revealed to basically being a cosmic linchpin that is tied to the one above all's counterpart and got amplified by several infinite magnitudes. Now, I was originally going to have the debunk portion of Godzilla and Hell here, but I thought it would just be better to cover the base interpretation of the character and just move on to the other versions, because that is what you guys are really here for. But if you are interested in how to really interpret its scaling, or honestly its fan-wank scaling, I do have that section near the end of the video. But now, what does Godzilla have to offer outside of this hellish iteration? Well, Godzilla does have complex multiversal and even outerversal scaling through the IDW Godzilla vs. Power Rangers crossover, and of course, a Godzilla singular point novelization. I'll admit I'm not like a huge Power Rangers fan or a scaler, as I'm more of a Kamen Rider type of guy, so don't expect the most in-depth understanding and explanation here, but from what I've read within some of the comics, there are realms within the verse that are beyond time and space and reside well above the infinite multiverse, which itself has infinite universes. Within the crossovers, Godzilla was not only able to beat up the Power Rangers and their giant mechs, including the White Tiger Zord and the Dragon Zord, but he was also stated as being able to affect the multiversal focus and being the strongest foe the Power Rangers had ever faced before, which would logically include the iconic White Ranger, Lord Dracon, who was able to erase infinite timelines with the Heart of the Master. Although there are extra-dimensional layers within the Power Rangers cosmology, there is no indication that, there are infinite spatial dimensions within it, or that the morphing grid transcends the very concepts of dimensionality, which keeps it from being of a hyperversal or outerversal nature. But even if we were super generous and said that these realms were high hyperversal or even low outerversal, that is pretty cute, as you'll see later into the video. Either way, this version of Godzilla is mighty powerful compared to most of fiction, but when it comes to Marvel, it is likely getting gapped by a Father Celestial, or hyperdimensional demons and eldritch entities, even those that are far weaker than the real challenging ones that Doctor Strange has faced in the early days, such as Dormammu, Mephisto, and Shumagorath, let alone the abstracts or other cosmic behemoths that Hulk scales to or that he outright defeated. Godzilla Ultima within the series is outright stated to be a higher dimensional being, but within the novel, they explain more in depth that the abstract entity is at the top of an infinite hierarchy, well beyond other monsters that can manifest on countless spatial dimensional levels, and it can even envelop an infinite system of dreams within dreams, making it at least high hyperversal, but likely well above the baseline outerversal ranges. Unfortunately for Godzilla, Hulk already had scaling on those levels, even pre-Immortal Hulk. To give some examples, Worldbreaker Hulk was able to destroy a planet in the Dark Dimension, which has infinite dimensions, is beyond mortal comprehension, and is infinitely beyond Asgard, which in itself is beyond space and time, and can even be argued to having infinite dimensional gulfs beyond the mortal universe, even within the classic times. Umar, Dormammu's sister, who could give Zom a good fight, whom in turn was so powerful that Eternity's Avatar and Dormammu had to actually fight him together, had even stated that Hulk was destroying her realm, and this is consistent given by how Hulk was able to slap around Nightmare, who rules over the Nightmare world, which is within Dreamtime, which itself has infinite realms for each pantheon or culture, and it is even above Limbo, which is already infinitely transcendent to the lower astral realms and the mortal universe, and it is connected to all of the infinite planes of space and time, which my team soloing Marvel Rivals main Magic rules over. It also gets even more insane when you realize how many layers in the astral realms there are, and that beings that fight on these levels are actually duking it out on levels beyond the physical, that is, with pure emotion, ideas, and narratives themselves. And even those realms are considered low tier to the many layers above it, which again Hulk scales to. Nightmare's realm being within the Dreamtime is even more insane when you realize that Amadeus Cho, one of the smartest beings in the multiverse, who can analyze infinite layers of the multiverse and can even analyze data and search through infinite multiverses, thought that the Dreamtime was too much to fathom and that it was outright unsolvable or comprehensible through reason or mathematics, and it was well beyond space and distance, and it is even similar in scope to the fiction realm and the astral plane, which is the mental realm where the famous X-Men members and villains have used to battle before. Hulk was also able to hold his own and even trick a Zom-possessed Strange fusion during the World War Hulk event, so it is consistent that he can deal with those hyperdimensional entities. Hulk also scales to or above current Nightmare, who is even stronger than he was in the classic times, and who recently was able to defeat slightly nerfed Beyonders, who literally killed the multiversal aspects of the Celestials, the Living Tribunal, Eternity, and Infinity in the 2015 Secret Wars event. Which is crazy because even their fodder avatars can manifest and combat on several infinite levels. These Hellord type beings also refer to space-time and dimensions as not being sufficient enough to actually contain them or do their true scale any justice. For further proof that this scaling is consistent, Scarlet Witch, even while suffering from a witch sickness due to a chaos entity corrupting the goddess of witches, she was still able to counter some attacks from this creature, which was stated as being comparable to Eternity and Nightmare and well beyond the scope of the Chaos King, who was equal to pre-2015 Secret Wars era True Form Eternity, or the true multiversal form of Eternity, even prior to his ascension as a true Chaos itself. She does struggle against it somewhat to the point that she does need help from her mother and Agatha Harkness to defeat it. But to show that she currently scales to and above this level, Wanda later not only restores her former power and, is healthy again, but she manages to absorb the Darkhold and Chthon, who is the strongest out of all of the old ones, who are also known as the many-angled ones, which includes eldritch entities like Shumagorath, who, although not the absolute strongest of his kind, is certainly one of the top contenders. And for reference, Shumagorath's clash with Doctor Strange endangered all of the Hellish realms, which would include realms that already rival and match the scope of Nightmare's realm, meaning that their tense confrontation alone was affecting and could have possibly destroyed multiple hyperversal to outerversal level realms. Even nameless, less significant old ones were able to kill Aegis, a Galactus level being with ease, and could also fight on the level of the Abstracts themselves. On top of that, the Galactus engine that they unleashed was so strong that it took multiple high-tier abstracts to hold it at bay, and with there actually being revealed to be even stronger threats than this one approaching the battlefield, which again, Shumagorath and Chthon would still massively gap and scale above them. As a side note, this does help scale Godzilla because in the earlier Godzilla Destroys the Marvel Universe issues, Wanda, who would logically be far stronger than she was when she performed those feats, outright said that Godzilla was immune to her hexes that themselves transcend scientific absolutes. No. Godzilla's not resistant, not highly resistant, he is outright immune. Oh, and Hulk scales to and above Zeus-absorbed Allfather King Thor, who was equal to Scarlet Witch following her merging with Chthon and the Darkhold absorption, which amplified her already outerversal ranges of power by several magnitudes. And that Thor is likely comparable to, if not logically much stronger than even Rune King Thor and Power Cosmic Amp Thor. More context for that scaling logic in my Thor vs Superman video, by the way, if you do want to learn more. But it mainly comes from Loki already being able to trap and battle the current Beyonder, who is stronger than not only those who sit above in shadow, but also the Black Winter, who were the adversaries for those forms of Thor at the time. Pre-Immortal Thor was also able to get some good hits in against a being who had created and gapped every Beyonder, pre- and post-amp, that being Palhora. Another reason as to why Hulk is insane is due to the nature of his power and what his origin was at the time when he was facing these crazy threats. So, let's look at Thor and Hercules, who Hulk has fought against numerous times before. Asgard, and by extension Olympus, both extend beyond the mortal bounds of space and time, which on their own already have hyperversal to outerversal connotations, depending on how you view the cosmology and the statements. But I can't realistically say that it is anywhere below the high complex multiversal to hyperversal ranges. Asgard may look like it is in outer space, but the gods we see are actually avatars and fragments of the one above all, including Thor himself. This means that Asgard and these other godly realms are in a section of reality beyond our universe that resembles outer space, but it is actually logically transcendent. I guess you could think of it similar in concept to how the head captain, Genryusa Yamamoto from Bleach, had a fire-based Zanpakuto, but the flames that we actually see, particularly in his Bankai form, were in fact his own spiritual pressure in the forms of flames rather than straight-up flames directly. In essence, the god tiers amongst these pantheons, and especially now, are certainly up there with the abstract entities, at least their avatars during classic times, and depending on who you're talking about in the time period, they may even somewhat scale to these cosmic abstracts at their absolute purest forms, which infinitely gap their avatars and can oversee the higher tier to straight up the utmost highest layers of the cosmos. Base Thor already has feats of fighting other gods and elite pantheon killers, and he even absorbed a god bomb which was meant to erase every single god across all of space and time at the highest extents. Thor, even in the old days, was stated as being able to do a good amount of harm on the Avatar of Eternity, and given his numerous great and somewhat decent showings against the Phoenix Force avatars, which can, even help in remedying a wound on Eternity, this scaling is very consistent. And for further context, yes, Thor was prayer amped on an infinite multiversal scale when he performed the feat with the God Bomb in the final battle within the first war with Gorr the God Butcher. But I think it is pretty clear at this point that current Thor, even before becoming an Allfather or getting the power of Zeus, was already well beyond that amped level of power, especially since that was like well over a decade ago at this point. So you can kind of see how crazy the power creeps get, because Hulk can not only keep up with this base Thor, but outright match or even surpass his amplified states. And he might even be stronger than him even right now. This is also very key because Hulk has not had a narrative cosmic reason and connection as to why he is so overpowered as long as Thor has. So he was actually fighting a god, his avatars, and even his amped avatars, while just being an avatar himself at the time when many of these issues were published. You could also easily argue that current Hulk scales beyond the scope of Knull's first appearance in 2020 and the Black Winter, the one who made Galactus' Herald, and who basically fought against a power cosmic amped Thor and a massively amped Galactus. Although Thor was massively drained from the power cosmic at this point, he did have the same attire and he was likely still stronger than his normal state anyways, and even so, he was able to give Knull a pretty decent fight to the point he even broke his jaw. Knull was the same guy, by the way, who had previously fought Rai Sentry, who at this point had merged with the Void, which was individually already clapping up a Yggdrasil and Doctor Strange, who again, even before this power-up, he was already able to fight against the likes of Dormammu, Shumagorath, and he was even able to challenge Adam Warlock with the Infinity Gauntlet when he had multiple mystic artifacts at his disposal. So this Sentry times Dark Sentry, a Potara Sentry if you will, still got clapped up by the Dark Celestial Slayer. And again, even while depowered, Knull was still powerful enough to force God of Light Venom, which, has a hard counter power up to begin with, to fuse that power with Thor's hammer and Silver Surfer's board to kill him for good, at least for a time. So again, the power creep is pretty real. This scaling is even more consistent when you realize that Loki could have a narrative battle with the Beyonder, who was massively more powerful at this point than even his pre-retcon stage. Yet even with his master power set and knowledge, he admitted that he could not challenge the true Phoenix Force within his home realm, that being the White Hot Room, which is cosmologically speaking, well under the scope of the Below Place, where Hulk's power resides in and what he is cosmically linked to. By the way, this next part doesn't fully apply to base Hulk, some of it does for sure, but it mostly will apply to Composite Hulk, so keep it in mind for the rest of the analysis. Oblivion, the primordial void that towered over the Chaos King, was one of the most powerful Marvel characters for a good amount of time, and is especially known to those who might have seen my in-depth video on the mofo all those years ago, back when he was the undisputed king at the time. Unfortunately, throughout the more recent years, just like with my GOAT Peter Parker, he has been relegated to being basically a stepping stone for the plot and for power scaling purposes. Since Storm, who is comparable to Thor at this point, was able to defeat Hadad, who made Oblivion his even before he got amped by the Rot Storms, aka the Black Winters, that he commanded. But it is worthy to note that Oblivion was able to eat countless amounts of Rot Storms of varying degrees of potency that could even swallow Galactus, which implies that even one Rot Storm can overpower Abstracts, despite most being fundamentally weaker than the OG Black Winter that we saw several years back. Hadad, by the way, was so strong that even before his time skip, he made the True Eternity, Infinity, the Phoenix Force, and Death into pieces of his armor and gear in order to actually challenge the One Above All, which of course did fail. However, the Abstracts felt that they would ultimately leave it in the Herald of Eternity's hands, that being Storm, proving that she can pack a punch like the Thunder God, and arguably even higher thanks to her unlocked potential, which allowed her to have that one final push to overpower Hadad. Unfortunately for Storm, although she did mean to steal away Hadad, Eternity instead decided to basically kill him by taking over Storm's body because he saw how big of a threat Hadad was. And in a fit of rage, Storm actually managed to expel Eternity from her body. And she was outright stated by Eternity and the One Above All as being able to achieve something thought impossible by killing someone far stronger than Eternity himself. Which, hey, further proves that even these heroes in base and in their amp forms, like Storm, Wanda, and Jean for example, may indeed scale to those mid and high outer versal level threats, at least on the lower ends of that tier. And again, Hulk would scale to and above this, as you'll see later into the video when we go over the composite form. Hulk also scales to the first firmament, whose chains could hold multi-eternity hostage, and even a mere fragment of its remains would have allowed Doom Supreme to rewrite most if not all of reality as he wished. But now let's go over the original fate that birthed Hulk in the first place. So long ago, there was this contemporary to the one above all, the Mother of Horrors, aka Venruviel, who very likely was the first primordial challenger of the one above all, and she is the parent of the eldest who is currently possessing Hulk's body. And it is outright stated in Incredible Hulk number 29 as being the actual creator of the one below all, due to her corruption actually affecting the one above all. Hulk in much earlier issues was even able to defeat Brother Deep, aka Udru, who was created in hopes of usurping and mocking the one above all, at least his avatar, or perhaps his early true form, which in turn made the Golden God angry enough to actually rage out against it, proving that Hulk scales to the higher end abstracts, easily making him transcend several times well above the baseline outerversal tiers. You could even do some goon scaling and say that this means that base Hulk scales above even the early Hadad that had used the cosmic entities as his armor and weaponry, since going by the context of the beef, he likely put way more effort into fighting the Mother of Horrors and her creations than he would against Hadad, because she not only wanted to usurp him, but also mock him, while Hadad mostly just wanted to destroy him. Not to mention that Hadad was just one of his many challengers, while the Mother of Horrors was likely his most serious and OG ops, to the point that he wanted to torture and imprison her, which although he also did imprison Hadad, his prison sentence wasn't as petty, as savage, or as hateful as compared to what he did to her. Keep in mind that most of these feats were in Hulk's base form, and I mean, just imagine what he would unleash with his Worldbreaker, Devil, or Titan states on top of that, which is basically a Hulk multiplier on top of his already monstrous base form, which in its own mindscape helped him fight off entire armies, including not only Gamma-powered soldiers, but also heralds and cosmic entities at the same time, including a Galactus Hulk variant, which, you know, these characters on their own would already give most of the strongest iterations of Godzilla a hard time, or even beat them up outright. We unfortunately didn't get to see this form's capabilities within the real world, and we may never do, but logically speaking, current Hulk's base or his Infernal Hulk state should be above even that form, since that came out several years ago. So not only does Hulk scale to the middle and even the lower high ends of the cosmology, but even without accounting for this cosmology scaling logic, he has much better showings, adaptability, and combat prowess than Big G. I think by far one of Hulk's best feats is what I'm about to tell you, and it might be a bit confusing to follow along, but please bear with me. So Hulk was exposed to like this toxin or poison, right, which not only hard countered his gamma, but also used his own adaptation against him. So when Hulk would try to adapt against this poison, that power growth or adaptation in itself would just fuel the gamma drain effect. So Hulk basically had to overpower his own power growth that was, you know, actually fueling this gamma drain in the first place. So Hulk can hard counter himself. Yeah. I think by far one of his best showings was when he matched and even slapped around multiple god tier combatants, among them being Hercules, who could fight Skrull gods that could eat the Demogorge, which even back in the day could scare Hell Lords like Mephisto and Hela within its strongest forms. And Hercules even straight up fights like these Skrull gods who are basically heads of their pantheons, right? And we already talked about Dreamtime earlier, so you kind of get where this scales, right? But hold on, I'm not done yet, because he not only was fighting Hercules, who is a rival to Thor, but also Wonder Man, who is also said to be a rival to Thor, at least in the older days. Rogue was also there, who literally drains powers, and Jane Foster Thor was also there, who is not only also a rival to Thor, but she could fight the Phoenix Force avatars, high-tier gods, and even Odin in the past. So you basically have like 3 to 4 Thor tier characters, or characters that can deal with those levels of power, right? But even then, right, Hulk clapped them all. On the other hand, outside of the overpowered comics versions and his Final Wars incarnation, for example, Godzilla has rarely fought against many high-tier opponents at the same time, let alone while also being hard-countered, as most of his battles are usually 1v1s. Plus, narratively and consistently speaking, both technology and monsters have been a thorn in Godzilla's plans for decades, but he doesn't commonly battle both of these concepts at once while also being jumped by everyone. For Godzilla to even be in conversation for facing as much adversity as Hulk has, outside of scaling and cosmology logic of course, he would have to basically fight like an army of maser cannons, an oxygen destroyer barrage, alongside Mecha King Ghidorah, Space Godzilla, and Destroya all at the same time. On the other hand, Hulk has fought against magic users, matter manipulators, reality warpers, insane weaponry, others with the same abilities as him, and sometimes even at the same time while also being R-countered. Unfortunately, Banner did finally become overpowered in the soul department and had his soul straight up separated from the Hulk itself, a level of hacks which Godzilla would not be able to replicate no matter what we give him. Hulk is also a better hand-to-hand combatant as he has trained with Iron Fist and frequently clashed with Thor, who has thousands to millions of years of combat experience and godly degrees of skill. Apart from his very recent confrontation with an amped variant, he's consistently clapped up Abomination, who was literally trained by and eventually became an important asset for the Russian Special Forces. That's not me saying that Hulk is a god-tier martial artist that's equal to Iron Fist's expertise or anything, but receiving any type of tutelage from one of the greatest martial artists in fiction is very commendable, and it is certainly more impressive than the training levels that Showa Godzilla received, since even the lowest tier masters in Marvel have mastered pretty much every earthly combat style, and even godly, extraterrestrial, or extra-dimensional styles. Bruce has one of the smartest minds in Marvel, which have allowed him to create powerful shields and weapons that help him fight against Doctor Doom, Red Hulk, and Juggernaut. But he can also combine those assets with the raw power of the Hulk, and within the Rivals lore, he can even use an Exile ability, which would basically stun Godzilla in a state where reality and space-time don't apply to him, which would in turn allow Hulk to charge up a Mighty Thunderclap or a Gamma Blast that could erase the lizard. And yes, that's even while accounting for Godzilla's immortality, since Hulk and other characters have damaged or killed beings that logically have several layers of immortality and have a conceptual, energy, or emotionally derived existence. So it doesn't matter if Godzilla has high-speed regeneration, power-draining capabilities, increasing power levels, or conceptual time and law manipulation alongside adaptation, because Hulk has fought against that several times before and or also has those capabilities. And he's even defeated Thanos, who is literally outside the norm, or in other words, beyond life and death itself, and who can regenerate insanely fast against the effects of the Astral Regulator, which is infinitely beyond the power of the Infinity Gauntlet, and that was stated as being able to heavily damage and perhaps even kill abstracts like Eternity from just being near it. Base Thanos was also able to fight death and equal to Eternity, and made a team consisting of Doctor Strange, Iron Man, the Beyonder killing Blue Marvel, and Emma Frost, consider calling in Hulk for backup to decisively defeat him. So even these guys who can battle gods, celestials, or abstract entities on their own considered calling in the Hulk as their ace in the hole, which just makes it more apparent that Hulk is not only an outer-versal powerhouse, but he is like a one-man squad or army of outer-versal beings, a team buster at his finest, as his base form alone matches 99% of Godzilla's put together. Now, if you want to say that Marvel Godzilla could match Hulk or even beat him going by the current run, which he did by the way, even though Banner got largely amplified by the pin particles in the battle and had a special hammer, that is a perfectly reasonable take given by how strong they portrayed him to be, especially when you consider the incredible statements given throughout the run. You see, Godzilla was powerful enough to fight immortal Thor following his fight with Thanos, the super thunder god of thunder gods, an elder god who is right up there with the likes of Chthon. Thor does manage to hold off Godzilla for hours, but decides to destroy its avatar by summoning a conceptual freeze attack using the realm of the Frost Giants. In response, Godzilla is given a seemingly small but in fact a tremendous amplification in the form of a sliver of the Necro Sword, which is so powerful that even in its first stage of evolution, it would have allowed Gore to kill all gods across every infinite plane of existence in the mortal universe and in several realms transcendental to that, across the infinite multiverse. Then the second stage of the Necro Sword even helped Gore pull some infinite Zamasu and not only become one with the universe, but also use space itself and these celestial bodies as weapons. But guess what? Gore actually got another upgrade last year, which helped him kill Phoenix Jean Grey, who had the full scope of her power even before her recent amp, is able to overwhelm even a Master Beyonder, who evolved well past his pre-retcon state, and the multiverse group annihilating power of the cosmic cubes that are supposed to be just a Beyonder larva to begin with. That's not to say that Gore scales to the White Phoenix in her full glory, but killing a standard Phoenix avatar is still very insane, which even before these amps was already strong enough to make all of the abstracts very wary and even scared of its multiversal destruction potential. At first glance, Godzilla may seem like he didn't get as much of an amp as dramatic as Gore's, given the smaller amount that he was given, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that even a sliver of the third evolution stage Necro Sword would likely rival most, if not all, of the complete base Necrosaurus capabilities and power set, and its inherent boosts. I don't think it'd even be unreasonable to say that he may have even gotten a larger boost than Gore, despite the heavy amount discrepancy. And this is because, as revealed in the 2013 Thor issues, the Necrosword mocked Gore, and Thor even said that the god-slaying weapon was only meant to be wielded by gods, not weak humanoids like Gore. However, Knull, who made that first place, highly respects Godzilla and thinks that he is reputable enough to make him his Dark Herald. So even if Gore did have more of the sword and bonded at great levels with it later on, despite its initial comments, I could honestly narratively argue that even a minuscule amount that Goji got in that Godzilla vs. Thor battle eclipses the amps that Gore got, and that is mainly because of the Necrosword likely bonding even better with Godzilla than it ever did with Gore, even including its evolved states. Godzilla in this state was still powerful enough to push Thor into using his ultimate weapon, a superstorm that summoned the power of every storm across every plane of existence, across infinite timelines, dimensions, and so on. With this, Thor sacrificed himself to wipe out Godzilla, essentially stalemating at the encounter, but due to their inherent immortality and conceptual nature, they of course came back to life. And the insane thing is, once Godzilla returned, he was not only able to foderize a newly born Celestial, but also make Invisible Woman's shield struggle and prove inefficient, which is super crazy due to her power, basically being tied to the higher spatial dimensions within hyperspace, which is implied to being one of the power sources for the Celestials themselves, which contains and extends towards the 5th spatial dimensions, which is the low ball actually, because it is more than likely within those highly hyperdimensional and maybe even within the outer versal scopes, given what I'm about to tell you. Because with this power source and her insane mastery of her capabilities, she was able to pierce through Celestials several times, which sure, you could somewhat discount because of their supposed ties when it comes to their power source, but I'd argue that she's just as strong to begin with because she could also block attacks from Galactus and other powerhouses. And even other Reed Richards variants are comparable or even better than the Prime Reed Richards by his own admission. So it's fair to say that Sue was fighting several Fantastic Four members that were relative and maybe even superior to her own power level, which is insane considering that some of these Reed Richards variants could collectively battle Amplified Galactus with an army of Silver Surfers and even Beyonders. But anyways, yeah, back to the Celestials. These guys are basically the same entity across every universe within the multiverse, and quite possibly the large-scale multiverse, or the Omniverse itself, which contains infinite multiverses. And unlike beings like the Living Tribunal or Eternity, it is revealed that they don't really have the same type of avatar to begin with. But even damaging, let alone destroying one of these conceptual armors is remarkably hard, if not outright impossible, for even the strongest gods within Marvel. And to paint the picture for you, Exitar, who Sue was able to damage, was so strong that even Amp Thor wasn't able to put a stop to his judgment. And Exitar is so absurdly strong that the entire 4th host is nothing comparable to him, which includes powerhouses like Arishem, who effortlessly tanked an attack from 3 Skyfathers, ultimately superior to classic base Thor at the time, and even a heavily amped Odin, using the Destroyer armor while using the life force of every Asgardian, wasn't able to cut apart or kill one, let alone the entire group, which Exitar extends dominion and power over. To make things even more cracked, Sue could even combat and shield against a group of mad Celestials, who individually were already so strong that Galactus had to amp himself by eating numerous planets to even defeat one, making these already far stronger than even Exitar or the Celestial Leader, the one above all, who is even stronger than the gigantic Exterminator, who as I said already gaps all the other Celestials. These mad Celestials were also able to defeat the Council of Reeds, who could use space-time shenanigans to use their Infinity Gauntlets offensively, even if they weren't physically within the same universe. And even an attack of that magnitude didn't put a stop to the Armored Gods Rampage, who exist beyond the physical, and are themselves composed of ideas and are narrative creators that are made of nothing, but are also mostly everything, according to Beast. Sue is so precise that she can also make barriers in an offensive manner by cutting off air supply or by manipulating a killing bubble within her target. So the fact that this chick can hurt or counter idea-composed beings that transcend physical dimensions, yet she couldn't do anything to Godzilla, speaks volumes. Additionally, in one of the most aura-emanating moments of all time in fiction, Godzilla managed to one-tap Thor with his tail like he was nothing, who at this point will be stronger than he was when he fought the Necrosword Sliver Amp Godzilla, and this is mostly due to the Godzilla vs. Thor comic, referencing his battles up to Theranos, but no mention of his battle with Zeus, which happens later in Immortal Thor. But given the release date, Base Godzilla in this run not only surpassed All-Father Thor, but also All-Father Thor following his assimilation of Zeus's power and OP narrative manipulation capabilities. This major event was also after the Fantastic Four crossover when Godzilla fought a power cosmic amped King Ghidorah. Yet in this comic, Godzilla is straight up stated to be even stronger than he was when he fought the Space Wyvern, who the Silver Surfer himself stated was leagues above his own power and would easily destroy him. At this point, Norrin Radd has long surpassed his level of power that he had during his battles against the Void Knight, the pitch-black symbiote-like Herald of Knull, and Knull himself, which, yeah, although it did require a group effort to take him down, Norrin did make up about a third of the power needed to slay the Dark Beyonder counterpart, who again, was comparable to if not stronger than the true form Eternity slaying Black Winter. Yet even as strong as he was, he thought that the only way for all of reality to be saved from the clutches of Galactus and Ghidorah was by amplifying Godzilla with the power cosmic itself, which even from the classic era Galactus allowed normal humans to wield power in the star, galactic, universal, and even multiversal ranges. And Galactus, like other characters in Marvel, have gotten massive amps in power, so the boost I explained earlier is actually an insane lowball. But even so, apply that amp to Godzilla, and you can more than likely see that he is extremely upskilled here, which I'm all for. The Godzilla vs. Fantastic Four comic does further upskill Godzilla's first encounter with Thor if you do think that it is referencing Godzilla's battle with King Ghidorah, although it is worthy to mention that the summoner does say that Godzilla had slayed King Ghidorah, even though he didn't kill him in the comic, in the Fantastic Four one anyways, and more so knocked the power cosmic off of him and let him go. In whichever case, this Space Godzilla in the Godzilla vs. Thor issue pre-Necrosword amp was stronger than his power cosmic amp self, so Godzilla in the larger scale event would likely be even stronger than those amped Godzillas that we saw in those crossovers. Godzilla was also strong enough to counter the Crimson Bands of Sidorak from Doctor Strange, to the point that he had no other choice but to basically ban everyone against Godzilla and blast him into the astral plane, which is in the neighborhood with Nightmare's realm. And this plot by Strange didn't work out so well because this allowed Godzilla to rampage around the extra-dimensional realms, which eventually led him to face Dormammu, who has, been a constant thorn in Eternity's foot ever since his first inception, and even so, Godzilla beat his ass pretty easily. Godzilla's next fight was fated to be against the Hulk alongside Wakandan tech, thanks to the Black Panther developing pressurized variants of Vibranium, which were discovered as being the hard counter to Godzilla. So narratively speaking, even Hulk at his strongest needs a weapon that debuffs Godzilla and the Pin Particle Amp just to even stand a chance against the Atomic Overkill. And although Hulk does do pretty well at some points of the fight, Godzilla eventually just slaps him up and blasts him from the inside. The latest issue of him destroying the Marvel Universe also has him battling a massive mech that is piloted by prominent members of the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and the X-Men, including, but not limited to, Doctor Strange, Thor, Storm, Human Torch, the Spider-Man, Magic, Black Panther, and Cyclops. And I don't need to explain it again at this point, but some of these characters, especially Doctor Strange, Thor, and Storm, and even Magic, and Human Torch, are all easily within those outerversal levels of power at varying degrees. But it isn't as simple as saying that Godzilla can fight numerous outerversal beings at the same time, because he's actually fighting a hyperfusion of them and their amplified energy, soul, and magic-based attacks on top of that. Because just like in Dragon Ball and other fictional works, combined team attacks and higher powered variants of attacks are far stronger than the baseline attacks themselves. Take for example in the Marvel Zombies run when Galactus could make numerous zombie fight heroes leave the scene, with all of them calling for a retreat despite being themselves amped with a portion of the power cosmic that they got from the Silver Surfer, which is in itself also a portion of Galactus' power. And despite this large power discrepancy, with a special weapon and some prep time, the combined powers of the rotted Avengers were able to fatally wound the Planet Eater, which in turn allowed the Law to eventually take over his carcass against numerous zombified villains, who they also massacred. This means that with their cooperation, these heroes not only reached those Herald levels of power, but outright surpassed it by several magnitudes, and to those Sky Father tiers and even higher, which is where even a standard Galactus at the time would be at power-wise. Another way to look at it is by analyzing the concept that was brought up in the Tournament of Power in Dragon Ball Super when Goku fought against Jiren the first time. Because even if Goku had absorbed the power of the massively powerful Spirit Bomb, it wouldn't account for him being able to actually do as well as he was in the encounter. So even when you're accounting that these heroes were amped themselves, they logically wouldn't be able to stagger, much less fatally wound Galactus, which is even confirmed by the others not being able to really cause him much pain or damage. So if much earlier, much less intelligent, outright decaying variants of Iron Man, Bruce Banner, and Ant-Man could figure out how to massively multiply their power at a tier that was much more than the sum of their parts, then it really puts into perspective just how massive the multiplier would be from combining the powers from 13 heroes who are current, and of course, these versions would be much smarter than all these other versions, that I mentioned earlier. Yet, even with this insane power set, which is likely one of the strongest thresholds of power that we've seen that heroes collectively showcase so far, they could still not realistically fight, kill, or even magically banish Godzilla as stated by Reed Richards, and they had to straight up exile him to another planet in another galaxy, because according to Doctor Strange, even the astral plane cannot shackle Godzilla, which, as I mentioned earlier, it is a conceptual realm where characters can fight with emotions, ideas, and symbols, meaning that even these frameworks for existence cannot hold back Godzilla. To further prove that Godzilla will be in some insane levels within the high Outerversal tiers, he has recently become a Herald of Knull and an Infinity Roar coming out next year. The heroes will likely need not only to get even more amps on top of what they already have, but combine their attacks and develop even superior strategies to usurp the symbiote Gamma Fiend, who is quite likely the strongest Marvel antagonist that we have seen thus far, to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if the Beyonders, or the true form of the One Above All, pull up eventually into the conflict as well. So if Preamp Knull could endanger even high Outerversal level beings, and Base Godzilla fought a combination of characters who would be even stronger than the 2020 era Trios level of power that was used to defeat Knull in the first place, and then that lizard mofo gets a god symbiote amp on top of that, it would just confirm that Marvel Godzilla is easily a god tier within the high Outerversal level ranges, gapping the competition so hard that even most high Outerversal level beings are insignificant to his prowess. In fact, Godzilla was such a huge problem that he was fighting Marvel 616 for decades, and the only way that Prime Reed could think of to try to counter the conceptual beast was to send a message into the past and calculate a strategy with the help of the merged consciousness of 3 of some of the most smart characters in Marvel, who on their own have already measured, experienced, or already figured out abstract concepts that transcend archetypes, dualities, and mathematics or dreams. They further gas up Big G by saying that he has rage beyond the Hulk himself, and he's even showcased within the flashback of how Gamma came to be in the multiverse, which may imply that Godzilla may indeed be able to tap into the Green Door and is a cosmically linked being in the multiverse, probably at an even greater extent than Banner himself. But I'd say that Marvel Godzilla being this strong is mostly because of the inherent cosmology that he's in and what characters he's supposed to provide a challenge for in the narrative, and not because Godzilla is naturally that powerful to begin with. Now, don't get me wrong, Godzilla is a damn powerful beast that is full of hype moments, but the connotations of being powerful is pretty relative, and it can be of a lesser degree, or maybe of an insignificant degree, when you're comparing it to Marvel Comics and other franchises that have these crazy high cosmologies. Another huge problem, though, in this debate is how unfair Hulk is treated in the matchup, because these guys repping Goji need a composite Godzilla to even touch base Hulk when you're not accounting for the DC and Marvel Godzilla scaling. Truth is, if you have to upscale your character through that to even be in a competition, you're already at a disadvantage to begin with. Not that this is necessarily a bad thing, because thematically and power-wise, this matchup is pretty dope and it makes sense, but it is not as competitive as, say, Thor vs Superman or Hulk vs Doomsday, whose matchup parameters depend more so on their own feats rather than from them being upskilled within a crossover, and their power skill being derived from the setting that they're in rather than from their own intrinsic capabilities. But if we did bring up Composite Hulk, it is likely even more unfair to Godzilla, because Composite Hulk would not only have access to the Power Cosmic, but also the Venom Symbiote, the Enigma Force, which is the Guardian Life Force for Eternity, the Eye of Agamotto alongside Sorcerer Supreme tier magic, but also Iron Man's technology, Captain America's shield, and much, much more. In whichever case, Composite Hulk very clearly has higher versatility, higher quality power-ups, and more of them at that, alongside more degrees of immortality, narrative, and cosmic connections, and vastly more knowledge that even if he and Godzilla started out with equal levels of raw power, speed, and durability, they definitely wouldn't be close in virtually everything else, like general IQ, battle IQ, hand-to-hand skills, and most importantly, adaptation, resistances, and power growth capabilities. In summation, if you think that Composite Godzilla or Marvel Godzilla by himself can give base 616 canon Hulk a hard time or even outright beat his ass, I think that is pretty fair going by the scaling that we have seen in the DC and Marvel iterations. But a Composite Godzilla would likely lose at the hands of Composite Hulk, especially if we are including the new Infernal Hulk, a Cosmic Devil Hulk, so to speak, which the comic gasses up by saying that this Hulk is 10 times the monster that Banner was, and that this being surpassed the already grand levels of destruction that people have already seen or thought that the Hulk was capable of, which would likely include the Hulk that we saw in Immortal Hulk. If this description is including Banner and Toba Hulk, then the Infernal Hulk gaps that pretty well. This is because he is composed of the Eldest, who is the strongest Hulk on top of Hulk's insane power that, he actually straight up overpowered. And he's also composed of the Mother of Horrors, which even if we heavily downplayed it, would still grant a massive boost, many orders of magnitude larger than the amount of power the Eldest would obtain if, he, for example, got a hold of the Enhanced Power Cosmic, the Celestial Blood and Super Soldier Serum Amp that Doom obtained in a possible future, most of the Necro Sword's variations, or the Cosmic Cubes, especially since even the mere remains of the first firmament could rewrite the entire multiverse and most of its higher realms. And again, base Hulk broke chains from that same power source. I'd even be comfortable with saying that the feat of breaking these chains is even superior to what the Necromancer variant of Doctor Doom, Doom Supreme, could have achieved with the first firmament's remnants, since those shackles were specifically crafted for Hulk and refined, while the residues of that first firmament are exactly that, heavily decomposed, less potent leftovers. This, in turn, would make Infernal Hulk a cosmic elite threat, easily surpassing what we saw Toba Hulk do, who is pretty insane, and although it is not, Banner himself, and it's more so his body being used as a puppet, this Ravager of Creation destroyed virtually everything within the multiverse, and narratively speaking, likely within the grand multiverse, including a time-skip 616 Franklin Richards, who even amongst all of the powerful beings in the multiverse like the Scarlet Witch, Doctor Doom, Thor, Phoenix Jean Grey, and even the Hulk himself, he is likely even more cracked than them at his full potential in all of their forms, given that he is cosmically supposed to be like the next linchpin for the next cosmos, which, although it is stated to be a multiverse, it is more of an omniverse or a collection of numerous, if not outright infinite, high outerversal multiverses, given that even inferior characters or artifacts could affect several multiverses, and it's outright stated that there are nearly infinite multiverses anyways, even years prior to the Secret Wars 2015 event. And the recent Avengers Beyond issues also mention the multiverse and the even grander omniverse. However, instead of Franklin becoming the next large-scale Soul King, so to speak, he was eaten by Toba Hulk, who even call him the Anointed Prince, which further backs up the notion that Franklin is basically like the Naruto or the Anakin Skywalker, or in other words, like the cosmically ultimate chosen one, even amongst all of the insanely powerful characters in the infinite cosmos that are also in their own way chosen ones. He also mentions that he devoured Franklin's backup known as Mr. Immortal, who is conceptually supposed to be the ultimate evolution of the mutants, meaning that even this time-skip Mr. Immortal, who would likely be superior to Jean Grey, was still killed by this dark energy-empowered Goliath. Also, if we look at Infernal Hulk through its story-implied impossible high-ends, he has insane connotations given that if the one below all alone is in the body of a weaker base Hulk was set to destroy everything, then the fusion of a stronger base Hulk plus the Eldest who overpowered him, plus the decayed remains of the Mother of Horrors, who made Toba in the first place, would logically be way more powerful to the point that it could potentially even challenge or destroy what the one above all oversees, not only transcending its avatars, but it may even rival its true form, which even claimed that it was all-powerful, but only within an appropriately stable system, which proves that even its apparent high levels of omnipotence are not absolute. And directly merging with a cosmic level entity, especially a high tier 1 at that, should grant a superior level of power than that fusion of 13 Avengers in that mech that fought base Godzilla. And a true merging, like we also saw in Infinity Ending, would grant a much larger boost of power rather than simply combining attacks and strategies. So Infernal Hulk would likely have an even larger boost than the amplification that Godzilla got from Knull, but if you do think that boost rivals or surpasses all stages of the Necro Sword, including that third stage that forced the already overpowered Jean Grey to get amped on top of that, then I'd say that Infernal Hulk may indeed have a challenge here and perhaps may even get gapped. The later issues, of course, aren't out yet, but issue 4's summary says that the Incredible Hulk's consciousness is trapped within Infernal Hulk's Hulkscape, which is basically like a Gamma-based mental realm. And it also reveals that the Infernal Hulk isn't just a fusion of Hulk, the Eldest, and the Mother of Horrors, but likely also all of the countless victims and vessels of the Eldest, which may tip the scales when you're comparing the power of the Godzilla empowered by a Slayer that encompasses the Void, and this fusion of godly gamma spawn. Although this concept hasn't been greatly expanded on in recent comics, it is still canon, and I don't think most people know about this, but the one above all, even his truest form, is not the supreme creator of Marvel, as he's more so just an avatar for an even greater being. Known as a divine creator, who I'd call the entity that represents absolute infinity in Marvel, and is the apex truth or container that is transcendental to dualities and concepts of all levels, which you may have seen me briefly mention in the Oblivion analysis video I did many years ago. And this being also has its own dark counterpart. And sure, Infernal Hulk isn't like the level of what the true Super Oblivion is, fundamentally speaking, which I'd say is like a 10 on some arbitrary scale, but he's definitely closer to reaching those transcendentally higher tiers than the vast majority of other characters in Marvel, say like within the lower to middle ranges within that aforementioned scale, putting him potentially even higher than Astral Regulator Thanos, who could have taken over the whole part of the One Above All eventually, and endangered the Grand Multiverse and most if not all of its higher realms, and Godzilla would logically be around that similar ballpark of power with its Knull-derived amp. Alright, so let's get to the big nail in the coffin with Godzilla and Hell scaling. To be honest, nothing in the comic itself or the guidebooks ever imply that he killed the creator of the Godzilla multiverse or the creator of the grand IDW multiverse to begin with, because the matter of the fact is 99% of this evidence used to back up Godzilla and Hell are author statements that aren't backed up by the source material, and the vast majority of them are from people who weren't even the ones who wrote the issues to begin with. But most of these writers who stated these things clearly did not have the ultimate say in all of these franchises or Godzilla and Hell in general. So it's rocky to say if, these specific words, which may have changed over time, have any major value against what is directly shown and stated in the canon, or if it should be taken as primary or even rudimentary second form evidence to begin with. Not to mention it gets pretty whack when you have to cross-chain into extended continuities to push a particular agenda that the original material doesn't back up, because unless it's directly stated or implied to be canon, it is pointless to even argue it. And technically, by arguing for this extended cross-scaling, you're basically conceding that your baseline source material is not, actually enough to push that agenda. For instance, Dave Watchter, the writer for the final issue, when Godzilla fights the tentacled being at the end of the story, had told me several years ago that it is just a random monster that is chilling at the top of the mountain, and that it is ultimately up to me, or, well, the reader in general, to interpret the entity however they wanted. Which is not, really the best answer, but it still basically tells us that, he himself did not envision this being as actually being a god, or something immensely crazy like people imply it to be. At best, even if we did say he did create an infinite multiverse, one would still have to prove that it has infinite layers, or if it also contains every multiverse within that grand collection of IDW works. Brandon Seifert, another writer for the series, even said to me that he couldn't really answer questions about issues that he didn't write for. For obvious reasons, right? So using author statements from people who didn't even write the issues themselves is very disingenuous, which again, a lot of these guys do for some reason. Dollar Tree off-brand scalers will look you in the eye and use author statements from Twitter or Facebook as their primary evidence over the comics themselves, but the ones who actually read the source material will primarily use statements from the comics, movies, official Q&As, official websites, or official guidebooks instead of, this. And yes, I myself have used Twitter statements within my videos, like when I covered DC Godzilla vs. Marvel Godzilla, but they were mostly used as supplementary evidence rather than me actually using it as a foundation for my primary arguments. So to give an example about the validity of statements in comparison to what Godzilla and Hell highballers have to offer in scaling, let's look at what Marvel, Bleach, and Dragon Ball have done over the years within their fandoms. You see, we have seen Bleach's writer, Mr. Kubo, answer fan questions in the official Bleach Club Outside Q&A site, some in regards to power scaling, funny enough, that, especially for those that say that writers don't think about power scaling, but that is another can of worms for another day. Anyways, we have seen Akira Toriyama and Takao Koyama, who I mentioned previously, answer Dragon Ball related questions in officially licensed guidebooks and other manga supplements, which are canon. And for Marvel or DC Comics, we have been given story summaries and evidence regarding the cosmologies and the character biographies within each respective property. And you will find no such level of validity for Godzilla and Hell, as there is no primary evidence for his scaling to begin with, which vastly devalues what his power set is. To give you another example, would you say that the characters from Invincible fully scale to the peaks of the other Image Comics characters, which are canon to the verse, like Spawn, who basically has battled universal and multiversal level threats? Would this pit guy who fought against Canon 616 Hulk yet struggled with a fodder Invincible variant that is nothing to mark actually just upscale all of the prominent Invincible cast within the canon confines of the cosmology? No, and I don't think that most of you would use that line of supposed logic either. Think of it this way, right? Would every scaling attribute from Universe A scale 101 to Universe B just because there's implied or direct connections? And again, it does depend on how clear or unclear the comic itself and other media explain if these are canon or non-canon versions that are within the story to begin with. So if there was a potential man meme equivalent for Godzilla, it would be Godzilla in Hell, hands down. Either way, regardless of who you think wins, Godzilla and Hulk have both had immense, ever-escalating struggles in every way imaginable, alongside insane battles and their consistently showcased tether that they hold between the duality encompassing good versus evil. Over time, both have been portrayed as a hero, a chaotically good figure, or even a guardian of sorts, but they have also been portrayed as being sadistic, destructive, and in some cases, as the very end of the world or all of existence as we know it.
Double kill, triple kill, overkill, kill-tacular.
Behold, the child!